Ellie Mae Parker woke up before dawn, just like she had every day since she was old enough to carry a bucket of feed down the long dirt path behind her family's old red barn. She fed the cows, checked the fences, and made sure her father had his coffee before the first tractor rumbled to life. Today was different, though. Instead of work boots and coveralls, Ellie zipped a second-hand blazer over her blouse, wiping a smudge of hay off her jeans. She had exactly one chance to make the city believe she belonged. She had rehearsed every answer 1,000 times in her head while she mucked stalls and sorted invoices for the tiny co-op she'd built with neighboring farms. Everyone had told her not to dream too big. Her mother had even tried to talk her out of it when the letter from Lennox Enterprises arrived. "Ellie Mae, they'll eat you alive in that glass tower," her mama whispered, folding Ellie's old Sunday dress in the suitcase anyway. But Ellie only kissed her mama's cheek, smiled, and said, "They won't know what hit them, Ma." The bus ride from Cedar Grove to Chicago felt longer than her entire childhood. Ellie stared out the window at endless fields that slowly gave way to concrete overpasses and crowded streets. When the bus finally hissed to a stop near Lennox's headquarters, she stepped onto the sidewalk with her dad's old briefcase banging against her knee. The skyscraper gleamed like a silver knife against the cold sky. Ellie took a breath, squared her shoulders, and marched inside, ignoring the curious glances at her scuffed boots. Inside, the marble floors gleamed so bright they reflected the ceiling lights like polished ice. She checked in at the glossy reception desk, where the young woman eyed her flannel cuffs and the single tear on her coat sleeve. Ellie's hands were steady when she signed her name on the tablet. "Take the elevator to the 40th floor," the receptionist said, her polite smile never reaching her eyes. Ellie thanked her, pressing the elevator button with fingers that smelled faintly of machine oil and lavender soap. When the doors opened, Ellie stepped into a hallway lined with black and white photos of harvests, silos, and men in suits shaking hands over giant tractors. She wondered if any of them had ever lifted a shovel themselves. She spotted her reflection in the glass, her mother's old coat, her hair twisted up with the last of her grandmother's hairpins. She wished her mama could see her now, standing in the tallest building in the state, carrying her family's name higher than any of them had dreamed. The conference room was all cold chrome and sunlight pouring in through floor-to-ceiling windows that made Ellie's knees wobble. She pretended it didn't scare her. 3 men sat behind a sleek table, one older with a silver tie and a watch worth more than her father's barn. The other 2 scribbled on notepads like bored students. The older man, Mr. Gerald. Arrow, her interviewer, looked up, raised an eyebrow at her boots, and leaned back in his leather chair like he'd just found a lost farm animal. "Miss Parker, correct?" Harrow said, his tone dripping with amusement. Ellie nodded, forcing her voice to come out steady. "Yes, sir. Thank you for seeing me today." He flipped through her resume as if he were reading a grocery list. "Farmer's daughter," he said, loud enough for the other 2 to chuckle. "No college degree, no corporate internship, just this co-op thing." Ellie swallowed hard but didn't let her eyes drop. "Yes, sir. Parker Family Co-op. We run distribution for 6 farms now. I designed the entire logistics plan." Harrow raised an eyebrow, tapping her file. "So you milk cows, then you run a logistics plan. Which is it?" The men snorted behind him. Ellie kept her chin up. "Both, sir." Harrow leaned forward, folding his hands. "Do you even know what we do here, Miss Parker? Lennox Enterprises is not a charity. This isn't a bake sale for your local 4-H club." Ellie's fingers tightened on her briefcase. "I know exactly what you do, sir, and I know your Midwest division is losing money because you outsource instead of partnering with the people who grow your supply." The room fell silent for a heartbeat. One of the suits cleared his throat, uncomfortable. Harrow's eyes narrowed like a hawk spotting a rabbit. "Excuse me?" Ellie took a deep breath. She'd stayed up nights writing the numbers that now rattled in her head. "Your transport contracts bleed thousands a week. If you invest in local co-op partnerships, you'd cut costs by 17%. I brought the numbers. They're in the back of my file." Harrow flipped the file shut without looking. Miss Parker, this is a billion-dollar company, not a 4-H project. Ellie's ears burned. Sir, But Harrow lifted a hand. Enough. I don't think we have more to discuss. You're wasting everyone's time. I suggest you go back to your chickens and pigs. The other men didn't even hide their smirks this time. Ellie stood, her knees shaking but her eyes dry. She gathered her file carefully like it was armor. "Oh, thank you for your time, gentlemen." Harrow didn't bother to look up as she left, his laughter trailing after her down the polished hall. Ellie stepped into the elevator, her reflection in the mirrored wall showing her pale cheeks and shaking hands. The city skyline glittered behind the glass, mocking her with every mile of concrete that separated her from her farm. She pressed her palm over her stomach to keep it steady. She wanted to cry, but she wouldn't. Not here, not in this tower that thought it could swallow her whole. She gripped the strap of her briefcase and stared at her reflection, repeating her father's words. "Don't let them tell you who you are." When she reached the lobby, Ellie sat on the cold marble bench near the revolving door. She pulled out her phone, trying to text her father that she'd be on the next bus home. Her thumb hovered over the screen, but the words blurred. She had believed so fiercely that someone would see her worth beyond the dirt under her nails. Maybe she'd been foolish to think that a girl with calloused hands could step into a skyscraper and change the way things were done. Her shoulders sagged as she dropped the phone into her bag. She thought about her mama, about the chickens scratching behind the barn and the smell of alfalfa at dusk. She thought about how her father always said, "The world doesn't give you anything. You fight for every inch." A tear slipped free before she could catch it. She wiped it away fast, hoping no one saw. She was just pushing herself up when a soft voice stopped her. "Miss Parker." She turned, startled to see an older man in a tailored suit holding her folder. He was not one of the men from the room. His hair was silver, but his eyes were sharp and kind behind wire-framed glasses. He opened the folder and tapped the last page, the one Harrow had never bothered to read. "Did you really build this model yourself?" he asked. Ellie hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, sir. I stayed up nights for weeks. I know it works." The man's smile was genuine in a way that made Ellie's throat ache. He held out a hand. "Charles Lennox, I own this company." Ellie's mouth opened, but nothing came out. Lennox chuckled softly. "Miss Parker, how soon can you start?" Ellie felt her knees nearly buckle when Charles Lennox said her name. She had seen his photograph on the company's website, but never imagined he'd know who she was, let alone stand in front of her holding her dog-eared folder like it was gold. He didn't mock her boots or her calloused hands. Instead, he invited her to sit in the bright corner of the lobby, motioning for a passing assistant to bring coffee. Ellie's mind raced as she forced her hands to stay still on her lap, afraid that if she blinked he'd vanish into the glass walls. Charles flipped through her charts again, the corners smoothed by her nervous thumb. He asked thoughtful questions, not just about numbers, but about her family's farm, the co-op, and the neighbors she'd helped save from bankruptcy when drought hit. His voice was warm but sharp. Ellie answered each question honestly, her words flowing easier with every nod of encouragement. She realized then that she'd never needed that cold conference room to believe in her plan. She just needed someone with power to listen, really listen, and Charles Lennox was all ears. When they stood, Charles told her he wanted to test her plan. He didn't promise her a desk by the window or her name on a fancy title. What he did offer was better, a chance to prove herself. "Come back tomorrow," he said, slipping her folder into his briefcase as if it belonged to him now. "I want you to meet our supply chain managers. Show them what you showed me." He paused, eyes twinkling. "And Miss Parker, wear the boots. It reminds us you know real work." Ellie stepped back out onto the street, the noise of the city humming around her like a heartbeat. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, her mama's name on the screen. She answered with a grin she couldn't hide. When her mother asked how it went, Ellie laughed, breathless. I think we're going to be all right." She spent the night in a cheap motel room near the bus station, her boots propped by the door, her father's old briefcase on the bed beside her, open to her pages of hand-drawn charts and neatly penciled numbers. Sleep came slowly. Ellie lay awake, staring at the faded ceiling tile, wondering if this was really happening or if she'd wake to the rooster's crow in Cedar Grove. By dawn, she was up, reheating a leftover coffee with a lukewarm vending machine kettle. She pinned her hair again, tugged on her same blazer, and stepped back onto the cold sidewalk. The morning traffic roared by as she replayed every answer in her head, her hands tucked deep in her pockets. She felt her father's words in her chest, grit, grit, grit. Inside Lennox headquarters, they gave her a visitor badge and a waiting room seat overlooking the city. This time, when the double doors opened, there was no smirk or mocking comment. Instead, she found herself in a room full of seasoned managers, people who had built entire branches of the company's empire. Some gave her polite nods, others looked at her boots with curiosity. But no one laughed. Charles Lennox sat at the head of the table, flipping her pages open and gesturing for her to begin. Her hands only shook for a second. She spoke with the same honesty she'd offered the barnyard animals back home. She broke down supply routes and hidden waste, traced numbers with a firm finger, and answered every skeptical question with calm resolve. Her accent slipped through when she got excited, dropping her G's and drawing out her vowels, but she didn't care. By the time she finished, the room was quiet. One manager leaned forward, tapping the chart with a pencil. "You figured all this with no degree?" Ellie nodded, steady. "Sir, out there a mistake means a crop fails. We don't have room for guessing." A soft chuckle spread around the table. Charles Lennox leaned back, his smile impossible to hide. He clapped once, slow and sure, and the others followed. Ellie felt her throat tighten. She stood there, cheeks warm, boots planted firm on the marble floor of a billion-dollar company. When the meeting ended, Charles asked her to stay behind. "How soon can you start training our Midwest Division leads?" he asked, as if it were the simplest thing. Ellie swallowed a laugh, her knees knocking inside. "Tomorrow, sir," Charles grinned. "Good answer. Let's get you a badge that doesn't say visitor." By the time the news reached Cedar Grove, Ellie's father stood on the porch with the old cordless phone pressed tight to his ear. He didn't say much, just grunted once or twice, but when he hung up, he wiped his eyes with the sleeve of his worn flannel and told her mama to set an extra place at the table because their girl was coming home, but not for long. She'd have city meetings now, people calling her Miss Parker instead of the Parker girl, and there'd be trucks rolling in with her name on the contracts. Her first real day on the job didn't come with a corner office. Instead, it came with a hard hat, steel-toe boots, and a tour of local suppliers who had once been scared to trust city men in suits. Ellie met them on dusty roads and cracked porches, pulling out her file just like she did back at Lennox. She spoke to them in their own language: bushels, freight rates, fair pay, rain forecasts. She made promises she knew she'd keep, and every handshake sent her name further down the rows of soy and wheat. Weeks turned into months. Ellie still woke before dawn, even when she slept in an apartment overlooking the skyline she used to fear. She still carried her father's briefcase, its brass corners scuffed from miles of dust and dreams. Some mornings she found herself on a plane to a supplier meeting. Other days she'd stand in a room full of stiff collars, talking about fuel surcharges and harvest cycles. Each time someone tried to talk down to her, she'd smile and remind them she'd run a farm before she ever saw their spreadsheets. Word spread that Lennox's Midwest division was changing. The numbers proved it. Costs down, trust up, communities that once thought big companies were thieves now found allies instead. At the annual shareholder meeting, Ellie stood behind Charles Lennox while he gave her credit in front of everyone. Investors in tailored suits, press snapping photos, and Harrow in the back, his eyes wide, his face pale. Udrikdom. When she stepped down from the stage, she walked right past him, her boots clicking on the marble floor that once made her knees weak. She didn't bother to stop when Harrow called her name. He stammered something about coffee, about apologies. She turned, steady, her voice polite but strong. "I think you've taken enough of my time, Mr. Harrow." He shrank under the weight of her calm dismissal, and Ellie walked on. When she stepped outside the tower, The wind off Lake Michigan felt like home, clean, cold, honest. She called her mama first thing. "It's done, Ma." They listened. Her mother cried into the phone, happy tears mixing with soft laughter that drifted down the line like summer rain. That night, back in her apartment, Ellie stood by her window, the city lights glittering like a million stars beneath her boots. She took her father's briefcase from its spot near the door, set it on the table, and laid out new plans, ideas for training programs, fair wage guarantees, and a promise that no girl like her would ever feel small in a glass tower again. She didn't have to pretend anymore. She was the farmer's daughter, the girl with dirt under her nails and numbers that couldn't be denied. When the sun rose over the skyline, Ellie was ready. She slipped on her boots, just like Charles told her to do that first day. She caught her reflection in the glass, the same steel in her eyes, the same grit in her bones. Maybe some people would never understand how a girl from Cedar Grove ended up at the top of a skyscraper. But those people didn't matter now. What mattered was the work, the change, and the quiet promise she'd made to the family who taught her that no field was too wide and no dream too big. She flicked off the lamp, grabbed her old briefcase, and stepped out the door. Another day, another set of numbers, another handshake that would tie city glass to farm dirt in a way no one had dared before. Somewhere below, the elevators hummed to life. Ellie Mae Parker was coming down, boots steady, ready to remind every polished shoe and silk tie that there was power in being underestimated, and that the girl they once mocked could build something they'd never seen coming.